Phenology can help you meet your outreach and science goals.
Thanks, Erin. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. And if you do have any questions, just chat them into the box, and we'll answer them at the end. And if we don't get a chance to answer them audibly, we'll write up the answers and send them to you later. So thanks for participating. So just to get calibrated, I wanted to go over the things that I want to discuss today on today's webinar. First, we want to talk about the how and the why of creating what we call a group or a shared site on the ground and in Nature's Notebook online. And we hope that you'll understand how to select species to monitor based on a local or national science question that you might have. We also want to describe the meaning of a phenology program and how to use that to meet your organizational goals. And then I'm going to ask if you want to participate in a challenge. So just before we get started, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with what we mean when we say phenology, in case you haven't listened to one of our webinars before. Phenology is basically the science of the season, so it has to do with the timing of life cycle events in plants and animals. We call them phenophases, and their relationship to environmental conditions. So things like spring bloom and leaf senescence at the end of the season, also bird migration, hibernation, insect emergence, all of those things that are observable and you can see in nature happening seasonally. That's what we call phenology. And these life cycle stages are present in just about every animal and plant species on the planet. And they do occur at certain times depending on the species and depending on how it interacts with its habitat. A little bit about our phenology network. We were established in 2007 to create a standardized data set for use in research, for phenology research. We were interested in having a place where people could contribute their scientific data, their observations on phenology, and standardizing that data set, because in the past, people who were keeping nature journals and observations may not have been recording things in the same way. And so we wanted to make that standardized so that it was easier to use and understand as a research project. We also want to make that data available for people to make decisions if they're land managers or other folks interested in scientific research. And we want to encourage people of all ages and backgrounds to observe and record phenology. Phenology is a great way to engage people in the outdoors and get them interested in what's going on around them. And the way that we do that is through our citizen science program called Nature's Notebook. It's actually a citizen and professional science program because we have both scientists and citizens contributing their phenology observations to it. And both scientists and local people are using it to answer science questions that they have about how the environment is changing around them. So let me just get a sense of how many people out there are participating in Nature's Notebook. We're going to do a quick poll. Can everybody see that, I hope? Okay, if you are already participating in Nature's Notebook, go ahead and select how you're participating. Are you an observer? Do you participate as part of a group? Are you an administrator for a group? Or are you completely new to Nature's Notebook?
So it looks like we have about half of the people on the webinar have not yet joined Nature's Notebook. About 30% are administrators for groups, and 15% are individual observers.
Great. Okay. So we have a nice mix of people. If you are new to Nature's Notebook, then what you see on the screen is a sample of our data sheets and things that we record for observation purposes. In this example, you can see a deciduous tree. It's an oak tree. And we ask about questions about the leaves, the flowers, and the fruits. And we get a little bit more detailed. As you get more comfortable with making your observations, you might be able to answer these questions a little more precisely. So we ask that you answer, yes, I see it, no, you don't see it, or no, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. So then that way you can make observations through time, and folks that are using the data in the database can understand that maybe you're not quite comfortable with the phenophase or if it's not happening. And oftentimes we'll look for phenophases that are occurring that have a no preceding it, because then we can better understand exactly when the timing of that phenophase happened. We've also got protocols for birds. My slide's not changing. All right, we're having a little technical difficulty. There we go. We've also got phenophases for birds, and we ask not only if they're present or if they're absent, but we ask what they're doing. Are they feeding? Are they active? Are they young? Are they visiting flowers? And then that gives us a better sense of what's happening to them in their habitat. All of this data that is input into Nature's Notebook is able to be exported as well. We have what we call visualization tools, and this is an example of what that looks like. We can aggregate a number of sites for certain species, and as you see in the top, we've aggregated the sites that are including observations of red maples in the northeastern United States, versus in the bottom part of the screen, you can see the aggregation of red maples in the southern part of the United States. The colors that you see indicate exactly when those phenophases were appearing. And as you might expect, the red maples were leafing and flowering in the south sooner than they were in the northern part of the United States in 2013. You can also see where people had entered a no for their observation, because the lighter gray lines indicate that someone looked at the plant and they said, no, that phenophase is not occurring. The darker gray section is where we don't have an observation, so we don't know if somebody saw that or if they didn't, and that's why we really like people to say if they're not seeing something. Okay, now that we've kind of gone over some real basic information about Nature's Notebook, you can find a lot more of that online. I want to talk a little bit more about what it means to participate at a site. And we have lots of different groups that are using Phenology as part of their programming already. They may or may not consider themselves using Phenology, but in fact they are. And sites are anything from a nature center to a botanical garden, a community trail, or a wetland, a national park, or a national wildlife refuge. All of these things can be sites. They can also be schools, or they can be your backyard. And when you think about Phenology programming at a particular site, like a nature center, the landscape is really vast. There are so many different options and so many different activities that you can do related to Phenology, or even just related to nature in general. There's lots of nooks and crannies and lots of different directions you can go, kind of like the Grand Canyon, and that can actually be pretty overwhelming. Many of these locations are responsible for a lot of different types of programming, where they invite the public in, or they have people doing trail maintenance, scientific research. Maybe they have a docent program. Perhaps they are doing wildlife and land management, or maybe they have scout groups and school groups coming in and they need to come up with projects for them. So these are some things that happen on a lot of these community or public properties. And of course, in today's society, we are also strapped by the amount of funding that we have and the amount of staff that we have at these locations. So it's hard to really juggle all of those programmatic responsibilities and feel like you're doing a good job. So really the best thing to do is to think about how you might collaborate with other groups in a community, or otherwise form partnerships between organizations that have similar missions. Also, think about how you might engage some volunteers in doing or helping with some of these projects. Probably a lot of you are already doing that in a number of different ways, especially if you have site-based programming. And I think it's a great way to build community and just get people involved in what kind of things are happening at your public location. And in that sense, it kind of creates a shared experience. And the shared experience can be between the staff at the park or the refuge or whatever the location is, as well as between the community. So the next thing I want to talk about is what we've started calling local phenology leaders. A local phenology leader is a person interested in using phenology to meet outreach, education, science, other kind of goals for their program, and it can be at any kind of site. When we say site, we mean, you know, a refuge, a school, a botanical garden, or anything of that nature. What we really aim to do as a local phenology leader is to engage others, and we want to engage the community in either scientific research, education, or other kind of programming at the site. I want to do another quick poll, and I want to find out whether or not people would consider themselves a local phenology leader. In other words, do you engage people at your site or at your favorite location, whether you're a volunteer or a staff person, in some sort of outreach, education, or science? Okay. Seems like about 2/3 of you do already consider yourselves a local phenology leader. That's great. So anyone can really be a local phenology leader. You don't have to be a staff person or a federal employee to be a local phenology leader. You can be a refuge manager, a scientist, you can be an observer or a volunteer. You can be some sort of an administrative person that is interested or has to manage a certain number of properties. I think anyone who has an interest in engaging and organizing people can be a local phenology leader. Why might we want to have local phenology leaders? Well, local phenology leaders can help us establish some sort of program, whether it's for a scientific purpose or an outreach or education purpose. So perhaps you're a teacher at a school and you want to engage your students during the school hours or after school hours in a phenology project to better understand the natural world. Maybe you're a scientist or researcher who's interested in a long-term phenology project and you need help gathering some observations for that project. Or perhaps you're a land manager who is in need of understanding exactly what's happening on the property that you're managing. And in that sense, if you consider yourself a leader, you can engage community members to help you collect phenology observations. One thing that I usually suggest that people do is to establish a science question. And that's regardless of whether or not you consider yourself a scientist or an outreach person. I think having a science question is really helpful to guide the framework of a phenology program at your site. So what that really involves is maybe thinking about a species interaction that you're interested in, or thinking about what certain plants look like during their phenophases throughout the year, or if it's for a management purpose, like the example I have on the lower right, which is an invasive species. Maybe you're interested in just understanding the timing of that better so you can better understand when to treat for that. Science questions can help engage people for the long term. And so when we think about implementing a phenology program, we want to establish something that is going to be around for a long time and can become a framework for other programming at the site. It also makes participation more interesting and helps people stay engaged for a long period of time, especially if they're gathering data for a certain question and they want to know what the answer is. Maybe it's a seasonal question or an annual question, or you need to have 5 years worth of data before you can answer it. Having people plug into that in a way, instead of just collecting the data and moving on with their day, really gives them a sense of meaning for that project and helps them understand better how they can interact with the location. It also, of course, provides more opportunities to generate more interest and future science questions because, as we know, one science question usually leads to another pretty quickly. So how can I be a local phenology leader and create a phenology program at my site? Well, there's just a few things that you can do, and we have resources to help you do all of them. The first thing you want to do is think about the species that you might want to monitor. And if you can't think of a local science question that you might answer, then we also have campaigns through the USA National Phenology Network that you can plug into where people who are collecting data for a broader scientific research purpose. And we can share with you the information on our website about those campaigns if you're interested. So once you've got the sense of what you want to observe, then you're going to think about what the place would look like, what your location will look like where you establish this phenology walk or phenology program. Then you'll, of course, need to engage your volunteers if you want to have reoccurring data coming in. And I also encourage people to think about what some of the measurable outcomes are for creating a phenology program. If you haven't thought through why you want to do a phenology monitoring program, then it's not going to be quite as successful and sustainable as it would be if you had thought ahead of time what your outcomes may be. And of course, those can change through time, just like your science question might change a little bit as you are making observations. And that's the purpose of it. It's just meant to guide you in setting up the program. I'm going to give you just a little bit of information about how to set up a monitoring location. And again, a lot of this information is on the website, so I'm just going to do a broad brush approach to what we have available. And if you have more questions, you can go ahead and look it up on our website. Again, my computer is not cooperating. Okay, let's see. So the first thing you want to do is think about how your place is utilized. If you are at a park or a refuge or a school, what exactly happens there? Do people take hikes there? Is there a research component to where your location is? Maybe there are already some established plots there that people are gathering information about certain species. Think about how people, and that's public versus non-public, utilize the space where you are. Again, you're going to think about the plant and animal species that you want to be making observations on related to either your science question or the campaign species that you plugged into, so that you can think about where they are on your site and how many you want to establish, how many plants you want to tag, how many animals you want to select. Oftentimes, if you're observing a species, we suggest that people pick 2 or 3 of the same species in different locations on a site, just to get a better sense of exactly how phenology is happening to each of those individuals. Right now we have about 943 total animal and plant species in our observation database. And we are adding species every year. We usually take species requests at the end of the year. We just added about 43 of them for last year. And those are based on ongoing research projects that people have, certain focal species that we have included at the beginning of our program, and also as new partners are coming online or people are interested in making observations on certain species, that's how we make considerations for what we've got. Right now we have species across the United States, and most people can find about 3 to 5 species at least to add to their monitoring program. When you're selecting the species, you also want to think about the habitats that you have. Maybe you want to have more than one monitoring location on your site, so that you want to do it by habitat so that the conditions are pretty much similar in each of the sites. And then that'll give you a better sense of how the plants and the animals are interacting with each other and how the timing is related to seasonal and long-term changes. Within your location, you should choose a site to delineate that is accessible to the public. If you're going to invite them to come make observations, you want them to be able to get there easily. We want the habitat, again, to be uniform, so that if you've got more than one type of habitat in your location, you might consider creating more than one observation site. Usually the sites that we have people set up are less than 15 acres in size. So if your property is bigger than that, you can certainly have more than one site within it. And you want to be able to mark it so that people can return there pretty easily and find the place where they're supposed to be observing. There are a lot of different ways to do that. To mark the site, you could use something like flagging tape or forestry tape, or take volunteers out there so they can see exactly where they need to make their observations. For individual plants, we usually use these very inexpensive aluminum tags with a Nature's Notebook sticker on one side, and then the plant name and maybe the species name on the other. All of them are numbered so that if there's more than one individual of that species, they're organized in a way that people can easily find. For example, you might want to create a map, and here's a location in Tucson where we have a phenology walk set up, and you can see that we've got everything ordered according to how people would come across it if they were walking along that path. And each of those individuals are tagged with a code, and the code matches what we have set up online. Of course, before you can set up your account online, you have to have a personal observation account created, and it sounds like some of you still need to do that. That's the first step that you need to do. You create your account, and you also can establish a site in Nature's Notebook, and that's where you'll add your plant and animal species to be observed. There are a couple different ways that you can set up your sites online. You can do a personal site if you are interested in observing maybe in your backyard, or you're not quite yet interested in engaging a group of people. But if you are interested in engaging more than one person, we have two ways to do that. The first thing we have is what we call a public site. Anyone can create a public site in any place, any location in the United States. All you need to do is click on the Add a Public Site link on your observation deck, which you'll find under the My Sites box. And you would be the owner of that site, so you're the only person that can add and delete species to that. However, anyone else can enter observations for those species if they select to do observations at your public site. We also have a list of existing public sites available on the Add a Site screen, so you can search for a site that might be near you already if you want to participate with someone else that's already doing that. The second thing that you can do is create a group site, and this has a little bit more detail to it. Group sites usually have administrators, so if you are the person who's the local phenology leader, you may want to become an administrator of a group site. That will allow you to see exactly who is observing at your site. That's one difference between the group site and the public site. If you are doing it under a group site, then you can track people who are users and how many observations they're submitting to the Nature's Notebook database at the location. Everyone's observing the same plants and animals, and the difference with this one is anyone can add species, so you can have people adding other plants and animal species to observe. It might be a little problematic if you're tagging individuals along a walk and you don't want people to add any additional plants. So as the administrator, you'll just have to go back in from time to time to check to see if there's any other species that were accidentally added. The other thing you can do is download the data for this group site, and you can see exactly how it is tied to the location. And group sites can be public sites as well. And the problem with doing that sometimes can be if you only want a certain number of volunteers who are observing and people join on the public side, then you can't really see exactly who is monitoring, because the people who observe at a public site are not tagged by their user ID in the database. If you're interested in setting up a group site, we do have a lot of information on our website. The web address is below. It's USA-NPN.org/shared sites. And if you are interested in setting up a group site, you just need to email us at groups@usanpn.org to get started, and we'll send you some more information. So if you are an administrator of a group site, you'll see this is a picture of my observation deck and one of the sites that I am the administrator of. Under the sites box on the left, you'll see there's a drop-down box between, you can toggle between your personal sites and your group sites. So in this example, I have selected the Pima County Extension group site, or group, and then you can see all the sites that I have listed underneath of there. Green Valley Cooperative Extension, Pima Extension Office, which is a public site, and that's why there's a P next to it, and then the Santa Rita Experimental Range. In the middle, you'll see My Plants and Animals. So those are the plants that correspond to the map that I showed you earlier in the order which they appear on the trail. You can also download your personal data from this site, and you can click on the button over here that says Download My Data. It shows me exactly how many observations I personally have entered. The other thing you can do is download the data directly from this site. So below that, if you click on the Edit Site button, It'll take you to an Add a New Site page, and at the top you'll see a Download Site Data button. This will allow you to download the information just for this Green Valley Cooperative extension as part of the group, the Pima County group. Another way to get the data that's been added to your public site or your group site is to download it using our data download tool. The data download tool is found under the Get Data toolbar on the main USA-NPN page. And there are a number of ways that you can slice and dice the data. You can check which fields you want to download and how much you want to download, and it easily downloads it into an Excel file for you to use. And on the side there, you'll see that we have some tutorials on how to use that data download tool. Again, all of this information is on the website, so it's probably confusing if you haven't looked at it yet. We suggest you take a look at it, and we're here and happy to help you if you have questions. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about how you can use this group or public site that you've set up as far as an educational or science program at your location. Many of your sites are probably already doing things with Phenology. I know there are a number of locations that do Phenology activities. They might have a Phenology walk or a scheduled bloom calendar for a botanical garden. Or maybe there's a public lecture on migrating birds, or perhaps there is a monarch project where you're capturing caterpillars and releasing them. And so those are all related to Phenology already. Maybe it's also a site that has a research and management component, so people who are maybe maintaining the property for native grasses need to do a controlled burn from time to time. And they need to know about the phenology of that habitat because they need to know the best time to burn based on when there are not ground nesting birds in the habitat and exactly when the grass is in the right phenophase. Maybe the location already has school groups that come for tours weekly, and those school groups do a variety of nature activities outside. Many of them can be related to phenology. Or there are also a lot of scout groups and organizations, people doing Eagle Scout projects that may or may not be related to phenology. So chances are probably the location that you are participating in already has a series of phenology activities available. I suggest thinking about the activities that are already available at the site and organizing them under a scientific research question as I'm before. Maybe some of these things that you're already doing can be plugged into a broader phenology program. And that's what I mean by a phenology program. It has something that is based around maybe a science question, maybe multiple science questions. You've thought about some of the outcomes you want to achieve, both scientifically as well as educationally. And then you have a list of activities that you can do related to the science and education outcomes that you described. When you're designing any kind of program, you need to think about the resources that you already have and the resources that you need. And maybe there are other people in the community, other organizations that can provide those resources to you and act as in a partnership so that both organizations are benefiting from the collaboration. And any of the long-term observations, that whether it's for a local science observation program or one of our campaigns, are valuable, and they can help both the local program as well as the national phenology database grow. So again, thinking about the scientific research question, what you might want to do is start out really basically and thinking about what kind of questions do I already have about seasonality in my backyard or at my park. And then thinking about what evidence that we might be able to gather related to those seasonal questions and why that's happening. And so as you are gathering the evidence, you can make your observations and enter them into Nature's Notebook. We usually like folks to make observations at least once a week, as regularly as possible, usually at the same time of day. And then that way, the data that we get are pretty comparable to each other, and you can understand a little bit better how things are changing because you've got a regular, reoccurring data set. I like to give an example of a question that I can ask in my backyard that's really easy. So maybe you can see on this citrus tree that I have in my yard that somebody's been munching on it. And I began to wonder, who is in there, and I could see somebody down there in the leaves. And, there's two different directions I could go with this. If I was really interested in getting the most yield from my citrus tree, that might be problematic. It might be problematic that the swallowtail butterfly is munching on the leaves. But then as a naturalist, I am actually very interested in creating habitat for certain butterfly species in my backyard. So that's another direction I could take this. And, if I'm interested in having as much habitat as possible, then just leaving the citrus tree in the backyard and available to the butterflies is a great thing because it provides a habitat for them, and they can go through their life cycles and come back next year. And that gives me a chance to observe both the plant and understand when the leaves are on the trees, understand when the butterflies are laying eggs on the leaves, and understand how many and how long the caterpillars stay in their cocoons before they hatch. However, if I wanted to get more citrus from my tree, what I might do is watch it for a year or two and understand when those butterflies are laying eggs on the leaves, and then decide just before that to move my citrus tree inside of my Arizona room so that the butterflies for eggs on there. And then that way I'm managing it in a different way. And that's just a really simple example of a science question that you can create pretty easily without having a lot of resources or thinking through anything too terribly much. Now I'm going to give you an example of a local collaboration that we have here in Tucson. There are others that are springing up across the United States in a similar way, but this is a great example of how there are groups working together to monitor phenology. They're using phenology at each of their sites as part of their programming and outreach, and we're also working together to answer a broader scientific question. So you can see all of these sites on the map here, and listed on the side are locations that we have on what we call the Tucson Phenology Trail. And that means each of these locations has a monitoring site or two set up that people can visit, and they can travel between each of the sites and have a similar phenology walk experience at each one. We've selected certain species that we know to be pretty regularly occurring here in the desert Southwest, and you can see those species listed there on the side. And the intent is that we've got all of these species tagged at each of these locations so that we can begin to make some comparisons between the phenology in each of the sites. There's an elevation change between many of the sites, and there's also, the city of Tucson is in the middle, so a lot of that is going to affect the phenology of these plants. And a really basic science question would be just to wonder if certain species like the ocotillo leaf out at different times in town than they do on the mountain. But what we wanted to know is a little bit more about one of our sentinel species called the velvet mesquite. This is a species that has cultural importance because the native people have harvested the beans for some time because they used it to mill into flour. And now a lot of groups are interested in supporting that and collecting mesquite beans and drying them out and milling them for folks to use today, because mesquite flour is actually a really good gluten-free flour, and people, of course, are interested in those kind of things as we move forward. So some of the more specific science questions that we're asking related to the mesquite include, is the monsoon season correlated with the dropping of the ripe beans? When is the best time to harvest the mesquite beans to get the most beans per effort? And how far into the monsoon season is it safe to collect beans for harvest? So we want to be able to make a recommendation on timing about when people can harvest these beans. We know that it's usually around June that beans are starting to fall from the tree because that's the phenology of that species. But in certain locations it might be later than that, and others it could be earlier than that. So we want to see if we can make a recommendation for the best time to harvest them so that they can also have enough time to dry out before milling. And so in this animation, you can see that our science question is really central to the collaboration of all of these groups. Each of the group logos that you see pictured there have some sort of stake or reason for participating in this research project. Some of them actually do have volunteers who they're using phenology as an outreach and educational tool. Others are interested in the scientific data from the mesquite for phenology research related to the timing of the bean falls. And others are interested in, the seeds and milling, so that's how they're plugging into this question. But everybody can kind of collaborate around this scientific question, and each person is getting something back from the participation. We thought about some goals and outcomes for this particular project. And when I'm doing program planning, I like to think about them in terms of short, medium, and long-term outcomes. So in the short term, we thought we would like to engage participants in collecting observations on a year-round basis on mesquite trees. And that's a really basic thing that we can achieve. Once we get that established, it should be pretty easy to do. Then we also wanted to develop some activities for youth and adults at these sites to encourage observation of mesquite trees. So those are the activities that you can do at each of the locations that have to do with phenology and phenology education. In a little bit longer term, we want to have enough data that we can share with participants and maybe start to develop this phenology calendar for the mesquite beans, and also encourage participants to recruit other people to collect observations. And that includes other observers as well as other people that are interested in being local phenology leaders. And in the long term, we want to be able to make that general recommendation about when the harvest time is best across the Tucson Basin. So each of those sites on the Tucson Phenology Trail have a person considered a local phenology leader for their location. And basically, the Phenology Trail succeeds in connecting people and building community around a phenology monitoring project. So what we're hoping that people will do in other locations is join the USA-NPN and become a local phenology leader and join our community of practice. And what we hope to have for the community of practice is a place where people can share ideas and resources pretty easily with each other. A lot of times when folks are interested in monitoring at a site or setting up a phenology program at a school, they'll be in touch with us and they'll say, do you have an example of somebody doing this at an elementary school or a college or at a nature center, at an Audubon center? So we want to be able to share resources between everyone and have people come up with ideas that maybe we hadn't even thought of. So speaking of resources, we have a number of them on our website. Our website is vast in the array of resources that it has. So in addition to basic information about how to create an account and how to set up a group or public site, we have an observation handbook. We have online tutorials so you can view things in a video. We're coming out with a Botany 101 guide and a phenophase primer soon, and those are some of the things that are related more specifically to the plants and animals that we have on our observation deck. We have planning worksheets to think through how you might come up with a phenology program and what your goals and outcomes might be, thinking about what your resources are and what resources you need. We have ways to connect with each other and just different curriculum by audience. So if you're at a site or at a school, we have resources available to you. And lastly, we do have our phenology data visualization tools, as I showed you an example of, as well as our data download tool that allows you to download the data into an Excel file. So we're here to help you if you have any questions. And the challenge I have for you is to first create an account for Nature's Notebook, and then think about how you might use Phenology or Nature's Notebook to tie together concepts within your organization. So things that you're already doing that might be related to phenology, think about how you could use Nature's Notebook to tie those concepts together. And then lastly, cross-collaborate with others in your region or across the nation even to develop a long-term phenology monitoring program. It works best when you include formal and informal audiences in that. And it's a great way for teachers to get students out to field trip locations, and people that are phenology leaders at local sites can get some feedback from teachers and other observers as well. So just to review, I want to make sure that we did, in fact, talk about the how and why of creating a group, a shared site on the ground and in Nature's Notebook. I wanted folks to understand how to select species to monitor based on a local or a national science question, and also understand the meaning of a phenology program and how you can use it to meet your organizational goals. So now I want to ask one more poll question and find out now if you didn't think you were a phenology leader before, do you think that you are now? And if not, would you like to be a phenology leader? Okay, that seems like a positive impact. So great. I think that's all I have for now. I think we probably have a lot of questions.
Yes, we have a whole bunch of great questions here, and if we don't get to all of them now, we will be making that question and answer document that we'll be posting on the webinars page. So we have a bunch of questions that are related to phenology trails and how to get started with making public sites. So one question was whether you can link public sites.
Link public sites to each other? I think you can. You could set up a group and link all of the public sites together. So if you weren't interested in tracking individual observers, you could link them together in that way.
Another question about the maps that you had showed an example of. The question is, it would be really useful if monitors and volunteers could view the maps that administrators create. Would there be a way to make those available?
The map, I guess, of the PIMA extension site that I made, I actually made in Google Maps. And if you Google Tucson Phenology Trails, you can see I created a map specific to that with all the locations on there so people can interact with that.
All right, another question about phenology walks. Are the phenology walks at various sites or on a phenology trail typically organized by different groups or by just one group?
I think it varies. Sometimes it's the overarching organization that's created the phenology walk, or sometimes there's a group or two that have come together. Maybe at a refuge there's a friends group and the refuge staff that are interested in maintaining that. So those two groups might come together to create the phenology walk. Or maybe the outreach and the science staff at a refuge are interested in coming up with a phenology walk to support their management plan. So we have examples of that as well.
Another question, do all participants making observations on a group site need to have their own Nature's Notebook login, or is there a general login for students, for example, to make observations on a trail?
Everybody needs to have their own login if you're going to participate in a group site, and that way everybody gets the experience. I think it's a great way to get students kind of bought into the idea of making a scientific observation and making an accurate scientific observation. So that's how a lot of the teachers that are using this are tracking which students are entering data. And we don't really recommend that people set up a generic email address for recording observations at a site. I think it's a lot more accurate if you have everybody entering it under their own ID.
Okay, and also in terms of submitting observations, what's the best way to do that? And someone had asked about whether we have smartphones, but if you're not able to use a smartphone, what's the best way to collect data for groups?
So there are a number of different ways you can do that. We have data sheets that can be printed out in relationship to the species tagged at your site. So you can do it on paper, and then the observations need to subsequently be entered into the National Phenology database through Nature's Notebook so that they're valuable and accessible to everyone else. We do also have mobile phone apps for both Android and iPhone, and we recommend that people set up their accounts in Nature's Notebook on the computer first because it's easier to do that, and then you're ready to go when you go out in the field. All of your data automatically loads when you load the app. And the thing that our apps do now actually is they are able to store data locally. So if you don't have cell phone service where your site is, the data will be stored on the phone and then uploaded when you come back into service.
A couple of people have asked for some of the science questions or how people have set up groups. I know you already gave a couple in the webinar, but maybe you could list up a couple other ones.
Yeah, let me think. So one of our wildlife refuges in Albuquerque is just getting started as a refuge, and their science questions are related to what are the species that are visiting this site. So it's a really basic question about what birds might be visiting the site and what plants are on the site, just because they don't have baseline data already existing. So that's what their science question is centered around, and that's what they're encouraging people to sort of keep track of and understand better what's there. And from that, they're able to ask management questions that might come up based on how the property is going to be changing from an agricultural property to a wetland.
And we had a couple more questions come in about the smartphone app, so I put the link to how you can download those and the name of the app in the chat, so you should have gotten that link. We have another question about whether we offer guides with images of the phenophases for any of the species.
We have some of that, and that's what's going to be in the works for our phenophase primer. Because we have 943 species, we don't have pictures of every single species' individual phenophases, because that would be 943 times 8 or 10. So our phenophase primer hopefully will give some guidance on what you're looking for in the general categories of plants and animals that we've got in the database, such as deciduous trees, evergreens, conifers, cactus, just some general guidelines. And a lot of groups who have a local phenology leader are in the process of creating their own pictures of their own individuals and having that available for their observers so that people can see exactly what that individual looks like. We know that there's a lot of variation between individuals of a species, so sometimes even having a picture as an example may not be enough. Having a picture
Is there a question of to the server site?
Yes, you can see how many people are entering data. You can see who is entering data. You can see how many data entries they've made related to the observer. So I think we have all that information available. It's just a matter of how you would download it via our data download tool. Or if you want to look at it, if you're an administrator, you have a button that says Manage Users, and you can see a quick list of who's making observations and how many total observations they've made.
Yeah, there's also an option on the data download tool to download a metadata file about what information the observer has entered about themselves. So they might put in whether they are in an ecology profession or whether they are a self-professed naturalist, or how long they've been with the program. Excellent. A couple people have asked about whether we can offer those tags that you mentioned and showed the picture of. And we can send those to you if you're going to be using them for a group. Just send an email to Lorianne at USA-NPN.org, and we can get some tags sent to you for your group.
And I just put my contact information up there in case you didn't see it.
We had another question about how we use the national data that we collect and whether we have any articles to read. So I'm going to put up a couple links. We have a web page that lists the publications that have used our data. And we also have a page where we've highlighted some of the, what we call vignettes, some of the analyses of our data, and stories that have come out of our data so far. So I'll send that link as well. Okay, we also had a couple questions about whether there are sites in marine or ocean areas or estuaries. And we do have some sites along the coast. We don't have any offshore at this time. But I'm also going to put a link to our visualization tool, which can show you where all of the sites are, and you can zoom in to see exactly where those are around the country. So I just sent that out in the chat. We also had a question about whether you can download data from other areas, so not just your own group, but other people's data as well.
Yes, you can do that either through the data download tool, which again is on the drop-down box on the USA-NPN.org homepage under Get Data. If you click on that, you can select whatever sites you want, or you can download the whole data set if you want. Or Erin just sent you the link to the Phenology visualization tool, and you can select more than one site in there, more than one species, however you want to do it. Again, we have tutorials for both the data download tool as well as the visualization tool on those pages online.
Okay, we had another question about whether high school kids can be phenology leaders or if you have to be an adult to be a leader.
I think there certainly are a number of high school students who would be a great phenology leader. I've worked in the past a lot with teens, and they may need a little guidance, but we don't have any rules about who or how they need to be a phenology leader. So anyone can do it if they're going to be a champion for the local site. What I would recommend, though, is having a plan in place so that it is sustainable and it's not something that's just going to happen for a couple of weeks or a semester. The point would be to be able to answer some of these long-term science questions and gather some long-term data on changing in relationship to our environment.
I had a question to ask for clarification about the observer metadata that I mentioned. So I'm going to post again the data download tool link, which is that results/data. And if you go down to the bottom of the tool, there's an option to select metadata tab. And that one is called optional metadata sheets at the bottom. And you select the button for observer, and then that will download that tab. Let's see. Another question about the Phenoface primer. A date that it might be ready. Expected timeline?
We're hoping to have that available sometime in May. The Botany 101 should be available by the beginning of April. So when they are ready, we will post them on our web page under our reports, which is our main USA-NPN website, again under publications and our reports. And probably we will send out the information in either an observer newsletter or a partner's newsletter. So we'll announce when those are ready for use.
A question about whether we measure the size of the habitat, the abundance, or the size of the animals being monitored.
Yes, we do have to do that. Certainly when you set up a site, there are fields where you can capture the approximate size of the whole site available, and there are a couple other parts of the site in general about its proximity to paved roads or the nearest water source. And in our phenotype call for both plants and animals, we do have a way to capture abundant data for both plants and animals. Many touch are on there. And if you want phenotype protocols are, you can take the plant and animal list from the main Nature's Notebook website. Under Observe, there is a link that says the plants and animals, and that's how you can search our database, find a species to observe, and it'll give you the phenotype definition page in addition to the abundance data that we ask about that particular species.
And what about uploading photos that they've taken of their plants?
We have a site or a place on our site to upload a photo of the individual, and it's attached to the plant itself. So when you are creating or adding a plant at your site, there is a way to add an image of it as well.
Is there a way to contact other observers if you have a question about their data?
We don't really have a way. We don't make our observer data available to the public. I would say if you're a local phenology leader and you've set yourself up as a group administrator, you would have access to the individuals who are observing if they are not doing it via a public site. So if you had a question, you could email them directly. But from the National Coordinating Office here, we don't send out observer information to anyone. Just a matter of practice.
Another question, do we have a way to do error checking in our data?
We are working on that. We have a QA/QC protocol on our website right now. Maybe we can send a link to that too. And we are hoping to eventually have a way to better determine error in the database, but we haven't quite developed those tools just yet.
Another question about how Nature's Notebook relates to Project Budburst, how they're different, and whether you can observe the same plants at both organizations.
You can observe the same plants. Basically, the Project Budburst program is better and a little bit more accessible for younger audiences and people participating in the short term, although you can also do long-term observations with Project Budburst. The protocols right now are a little different, but eventually we're hoping that the data from Project Budburst will become part of the National Phenology database that we're storing. So I would recommend not necessarily observing the same individual with both Project Budburst and Nature's Notebook, but although you can use the two programs in conjunction with each other, just not entering data on the same individual in each of those programs.
Here's a question about a local phenology leader listserv and whether we can make that available.
Yes, we are in the process of creating that. So if you're interested in joining the community of practice and being a local phenology leader, then we will invite you to participate in our listserv. So we'll send out that information if you indicate that you're interested in doing that.
Yeah, that's one of the questions in the survey that we're going to be sending out at the end of this webinar. You'll also receive an email that has that same survey in it. You don't have to answer both. You can just choose to answer it right after the webinar ends or in the email.
Let's just do maybe one more question, and then if there's any left, we can send out the questions and answers to everyone that participated.
A question about any results from schools that they could check out, either reports or notebooks.
No one has shared with me anything like that quite yet. You can look in the database and see if there's a school that has entered a public site, or maybe they have a site in there that you could look at their data. But I don't have anything specifically related to projects that were turned in. I do have some guidance on the website and some lesson plans and activities for different age groups. So you can see that on the front end. But that would be something that we would hope to have shared with us through this local phenology leader listserv and sharing of resources. That's one reason why we want to establish that, because oftentimes people don't necessarily share with me what they're doing, so I don't have a way of sharing that with others unless they share it back with me. So if you have something to share with me, please do, and please do join the listserv, and we'll send you some more information.
Okay, well, thank you for all the great questions. We're going to be typing up all of these questions and the answers to them and posting them along with the webinar video recording on our webinar page. And that's available at nn.usa-npn.org. So thanks to everybody who participated in the webinar. I hope you'll join us for our future webinars. You can see that the full list on the webinars page. And that link was given in the chat as well. So with that, thanks, and hope to see you at a future webinar.
Thanks.